The severance pay, as per the contract, is $71.71. And make sure to clean up before you disappear. At that moment, a murmur spread through the room. The words $71.71 and as per the contract struck a nerve. There's a history of tension between us. Going back 6 months, when rumors began swirling that Mr. Ingram would likely become the second president. At that time, a particular issue arose between us. My name is Tyson. I'm 59, approaching the milestone of turning 60. It's been nearly 40 years since I joined this company straight out of college at 22. As the years pass, time seems to move faster and faster. It feels like just yesterday when my eldest daughter was born. In reality, she'll be graduating from college and entering the workforce next year. I've never once thought of leaving this company. I owe a debt of gratitude to the former president, Mr. Underwood, who hired me. I've always been willing to go through fire and water for him. Mr. Underwood, even well into his senior years, continued to guide us from the front lines. However, around a decade ago, at 80 years old, signs of cognitive decline began to appear, and at 90, he finally decided to retire. He has 2 children, both daughters. His eldest married, had children, and devoted herself to her family. The youngest joined a company specializing in overseas business and currently serves as the head of their San Francisco branch. So, who would succeed him? As cherry blossoms faded and fresh greenery flourished, this topic filled the conversations around the office. I heard that the eldest daughter's son is the most likely candidate. While saying this, my subordinate Brian placed a stack of documents on my desk. I've finished preparing these. As always, Brian, you work fast. As I looked through the submitted documents, I listened to Brian's update. And it turns out that her son is about the same age as me. Brian is currently 30 years old. Since Mr. Underwood is 90, and his eldest daughter is approaching 60, it wouldn't be surprising if her son is around that age. Since the youngest daughter remains single and has no children, no one questioned the idea of the eldest son taking over. Everyone likely assumed things would be fine if he was Mr. Underwood's grandson. Good work, this document looks great, no corrections needed. It should be ready for the next step. Honestly, Brian, I think there's nothing left for me to teach you. I placed a hand on Brian's shoulder, and he looked at me with a hint of sadness in his eyes. While I'm glad to be trusted with work, it's hard to believe you'll soon be gone. You've helped me since I joined over 10 years now. It's pretty emotional. Scratching his cheek, Brian said that, and I responded with a soft, lowered eyebrow smile. I'm so flattered you'd say that. Or could it be, you'll miss me when I'm gone? What a sentimental guy. Jokingly, I teased him, and Brian laughed loudly. Come on, don't say that. It's not like I swing that way. The other employees who overheard chuckled, and the entire systems department was filled with warm laughter. Then, 6 months later. Tomorrow's my birthday. In other words, as of tomorrow, I'll be officially retiring from this company. When I was a kid, I figured 20 would come in no time. And even when my oldest daughter was born, I thought I still had over 20 years until 60. I don't know what it is. I want to send everyone off with a smile, but I feel so emotional. Just as Brian was about to tear up, someone stepped in to interrupt him. What's wrong with you? Are you really that sad to see an old guy like him leave? How sentimental. Mr. Ingram. The man had burst into the systems office and greeted everyone with his usual bluntness. This was Mr. Ingram. He's Mr. Underwood's grandson, someone Brian used to talk about often. That said, he's now succeeded Mr. Underwood and become the second-generation president. So instead of being called grandson, he's now referred to as Mr. Ingram. From the moment he walked into the office, the atmosphere grew heavy. But he paid it no mind and laughed loudly, unfazed. Thanks for working like a horse until 60. You did pretty well for an old guy. But honestly, Having elderly folks like you hanging around here is pointless. It's a lot more efficient if society runs with people under 40. I could see where he was coming from. The younger ones do adapt faster to new information, and they're more flexible than we are. Still, it was a harsh comment for employees who'd given so much to the company over the years. In fact, the faces of employees over 40 were visibly tense. Meanwhile, those under 40 showed signs of confusion, unsure of how to react. Agreeing outright wouldn't feel right, but staying silent could upset Mr. Ingram. That's when Brian, quick on his feet, spoke up. "Come on, Mr. Ingram, don't say that. When we were newbies, we learned so much from our seniors. We're grateful for that. But I also heard about our younger team scoring a big deal recently. Isn't it all about coexistence these days?" Is that so?" Mr. Ingram looked unimpressed. Being told that by someone like Brian, his peer and capable, must have hit a nerve. But Brian had one weakness. And Mr. Ingram knew just where to poke. "Still, you're a high school grad, right?" High school grads, well. People try to prop them up with terms like natural smarts or streetwise, but it's all just pity points. "So you saying that doesn't mean much." "Haha, yeah, you're absolutely right." Brian laughed along, though the hurt showed a bit on his face. Another employee quickly changed the subject, unable to watch any longer. In the midst of the conversation, Mr. Ingram suddenly remembered something and walked over to me with a broad smile. Then he held out a thin brown envelope. "Oh right, I almost forgot. The reason I came here was to congratulate you on your retirement tomorrow. Plus, I brought the agreed amount." With that, he tossed a brown envelope labeled severance pay in sloppy handwriting, likely filled with loose change, onto my desk. The coins clinked together with a light, mocking sound. The other employees, unaware of the circumstances, watched with puzzled expressions. As I frowned, Mr. Ingram looked thoroughly pleased with himself. The severance pay, as per the contract, is $71.71. "And make sure to clean up before you disappear." At that moment, a murmur spread through the room. The words he uttered, $71.71, and "as per the contract." There's a deep rift between us. Half a year ago, around the time there was talk of Mr. Ingram possibly stepping in as the second-generation president. Back then, a certain issue had arisen between us. Back in late May, the company sent out a notice about the incoming president. Soon after, I was summoned to the president's office. It was none other than Mr. Ingram himself. We had no prior connection, and I hadn't done anything to merit this, so I went, puzzled. After knocking and hearing his response, I walked in, only to be met with an unexpected sight. "Oh, you made it." There was the new president, Mr. Ingram, showing not a hint of a welcoming vibe. When Mr. Underwood was in charge, this office only had the bare essentials, but now it's more like the owner's personal hobby room. The shelves that once held trophies and photos are now lined with anime figurines, and where there were once potted plants, there's now a golf bag. On the president's desk sat a randomly placed Gundam model, and instead of the pleasant aroma of the black coffee Mr. Underwood used to drink, the heavy, greasy smell of snack foods now lingered in the air. I don't mean to criticize, but there's an undeniable sadness in seeing the office bear no trace of the man I once looked up to. And there sat the current occupant, Mr. Ingram, reclining in his chair, tapping his index finger rhythmically on the desk. He stared intently at me, then, without breaking eye contact, spoke firmly. "You're an old guy who just doesn't fit our company culture or vision. Do you get it? I'm saying I want you gone." For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. I can't believe Mr. Underwood would have left without any handover. In fact, as he got older, he had a highly capable secretary managing everything for him, keeping the company running smoothly. So, the fact that I'll be retiring soon. That's right, that secretary. Normally, she would be here, standing beside Mr. Underwood, as she always did, and she's 4 years younger than I am. Where could she be? With that thought, I decided to ask about her. Before I respond to that, may I ask one question? Huh? What is it? Make it quick. The president's secretary, where is she now? Mr. Ingram responded with a casual yeah, as if it was of no importance. I fired her. Just having an older woman around puts me in a terrible mood. Normally, you'd expect a young one as the president's secretary, right? Eventually, I'll assign one of the cute girls from sales or admin to be my secretary. I was stunned, speechless. Does he even know what it means to be a secretary? Indeed, since they are often with the president, a certain level of appearance is expected. Even so, without the skills to match, it means nothing. A presidential secretary isn't a fashion model or a company mascot, their role is to support the president behind the scenes. Yet this man doesn't care as long as the secretary's appearance suits him. The secretary who had supported Mr. Underwood was renowned for her competence, and yet he discarded her without a second thought. Just as I was standing there in shock, he brought the conversation back on track. The reason I told you and that old lady you're being fired is simple: you're in the way. From here on out, this company will be built around us young people. We don't need the older generation. Looking at his cold, indifferent face, I realized there was no point in trying to reason with him. Besides, with her abilities, that secretary will undoubtedly have companies lining up to hire her. So, I decided to let it go. Noticing my look of dissatisfaction, Mr. Ingram lightly patted his fist against his palm and continued. If you're so unhappy, let's make a contract. You're set to retire on your birthday, right? Then, I'll give you this as a retirement bonus. He opened his wallet and tossed a few $10 bills and coins onto the desk. Ah, turns out this is all I've got on me, $71.71. Consider yourself lucky, you're getting the president's entire fortune. So, no complaints. Just retire. And in the meantime, properly hand over your work to the young ones with a bright future ahead, and don't make any fuss. They say you should leave without disturbing the waters, right? That's what I'm asking. It was a flimsy excuse, but looking at his attitude, I had no energy left to argue and decided to accept it. But somehow, rumors spread in an odd direction. Before I knew it, people were calling me the senior who gets to retire with the president's full fortune. Of course, none of the subordinates would dare to call me by such a dishonorable nickname. It's mostly Mr. Ingram's loyalists who refer to me that way. Things I never encountered before started cropping up one after another. Whenever I passed unfamiliar employees in the hallway, they'd pointedly say things like, "Good riddance, huh?" or "Well, what do you expect from an old guy?" Naturally, I had no interest in engaging in petty disputes. Even without being told by Mr. Ingram, I'm retiring soon, so I'll just quietly watch over my juniors and subordinates from the sidelines. I believe that sometimes, those in leadership need to step back and observe their team from a distance. With retirement just around the corner, their words don't really affect me. Yet, the treatment I've received clearly frustrates Brian, who grumbles, visibly annoyed. The new hires and those aligned with Mr. Ingram have no idea how amazing you are, Tyson. They talk like they know something, but they don't. Seriously, is Mr. Ingram really Mr. Underwood's grandson? Calming Brian down, I continued preparing for a smooth transition for my retirement 6 months from now. Don't worry so much. They're the type who can't speak up unless they're in a group. Besides, my subordinates and juniors have my back. I couldn't care less what the newbies say. Well, maybe so, but as your subordinate, I just can't accept it. If a newcomer had shown such disrespect to a boss I admired, I'd have probably reacted the same way as Brian. And being in this position now, having a younger colleague stand up for me felt surprisingly good. Those supportive words had a far stronger impact than the baseless accusations I'd been hearing. I felt genuinely grateful for having such good people around me. But since Brian was too worked up to focus on work, I changed the subject. This weekend, My wife and daughter are going on a little hot springs trip. Just the two of them. So, I'll be home on pet duty. Hey, Brian. Recommend me a place with some good drinks again, will you? Puffing his chest out proudly, he replied. Absolutely. Funny enough, my wife's away too, she's going to a concert. I'll keep you company. Despite our age difference, nearly like father and son, we shared an easy, friendly relationship. It was a bond that went beyond the usual boss-subordinate dynamic. No matter what Mr. Ingram or his followers said, having colleagues like Brian close by made it all easier to brush off. Yet, Mr. Ingram never let that deter him. He kept poking his nose into my business, finding ways to interfere. Accusing us of overspending or saying the team was too soft. It was all based on his own biases, clearly because he didn't like me and thus tried to paint the whole systems department in a bad light. What's the deal with this setup? And here, why's this deadline so generous? Labor costs are rising, tighten it up. That's not possible. When I firmly declared that, Mr. Ingram openly frowned and crossed his arms. Not possible doesn't cut it. Do it. I'm the president, and what I say goes. What kind of dictatorship is this, I wonder? Even so, I maintain my unyielding stance. In truth, the other department heads, sales, administration, development, had all caved under Mr. Ingram's pressure and followed his every instruction. They simply passed the orders down to their subordinates. As a result, employees were burning out, struggling to meet the increased workloads and quality standards. It seems the administration, under Mr. Ingram's influence, is an exception, but he's probably just found a favorite among the female staff. But I wasn't about to comply. It's impossible. I've been doing things this way for nearly 40 years without issues. Piling on more only adds to my team's burden. They're human beings, forcing extra work on them is out of the question. I won't do it. As I stared him down, he clicked his tongue in frustration and stormed off. One day, after many days like this, Mr. Ingram stopped me in the hallway. After you're gone, I'll be doing some reorganization. We need fresh blood, so I don't want a single trace of you left behind. Wouldn't want your successor burdened by your legacy, right? So, sign here. He pulled out a document from his bag, shoving it in my hands. It was a document stating that if I left even a single trace behind, they would file a claim for damages. Of course, it was legally meaningless, but arguing would get me nowhere. With a sigh, I signed the paper. Watching me, Mr. Ingram barely bothered to check it before tucking the document away. Satisfied, he walked off with a smug look on his face. Soon after, Brian caught up to me, a puzzled expression on his face. Hey, did Mr. Ingram seem unusually cheerful just now? I don't know, it feels like the calm before the storm. Do you know what's going on? If I told him I'd been pressured into signing such an absurdly one-sided paper, he'd make a scene. So, I brushed it off. And just like that, 6 months passed. I managed to hold my ground, clashing with Mr. Ingram right up until the day before my retirement. He seemed bent on pestering me to the very end. That bit about the severance pay of just over $70 is honestly the least of my concerns. He didn't need to come all the way here to say it, but it's clear he wanted to humiliate me one last time. As I glared at the brown envelope from earlier, Mr. Ingram spoke up, deliberately mocking. What's the matter? Were you really that happy? Well, for someone like you, I suppose $70 must feel like a fortune. Consider the loose change a bonus. Now take it and leave, your place is at home, not here. I noticed Brian clenching his fists in anger. Other employees, who'd initially looked confused, now displayed expressions of mounting outrage. Seeing their reactions, I thought to myself, no matter how tyrannical Mr. Ingram was, no matter how much his followers belittled me, the reputation I'd built over the years wasn't for nothing. Rebellion against Mr. Ingram had been simmering in our department, but this was the final straw. A storm of protest erupted. "Excuse me, but this is too much. You've only been here 6 months, yet you talk as if you know everything. You have no idea what Tyson has been through and accomplished." Brian's words sliced through the silence. With his lead, other employees began speaking up in my defense, directing their support toward Mr. Ingram. I never thought I'd have such an amazing boss. Despite my high school education, he treated me no differently from my college-educated peers, teaching me the ropes and showing equal respect to everyone. That's who Tyson is. In the systems department. Unless it's due to unavoidable reasons like pregnancy, caregiving, or relocation, hardly anyone quits. Doesn't that say something about Tyson's character? Everyone nodded in agreement with Brian's heartfelt plea. But Mr. Ingram stopped them all with a raised palm. "If you want to oppose me, then I'll fire you all. It's no problem finding tech staff for the systems department, and I won't miss any of you. This is my domain, so if you can't follow my rules, then leave." As someone already retiring soon, I wasn't concerned. But the others were in a different situation. People like Brian, supporting families, or single parents juggling childcare and elderly care, they were all at risk. "Mr. Ingram, that's too harsh. You can blame me if you want, but please don't involve my team." Mr. Ingram immediately seized on my words, twisting them. "Oh? And who's going to stop me from doing what I want as president? Can't you understand something as simple as resigning if you have complaints?" Honestly, I always suspected the systems department was full of deadweight. I hadn't heard any such rumors, but it was likely the other department heads, unhappy with my defiance, who told Mr. Ingram just that. My mind, which had remained unshaken despite everything, began to ripple like a stone dropped in a calm pond. My once serene thoughts stirred within me. Very well. Then, I'll follow the terms of the contract we made. I erased a certain system I had developed right in front of him. "What?" "That." The entire staff, knowing what I had done, gasped in horror. Meanwhile, Mr. Ingram, clueless about what had just occurred, only scowled in confusion. But as he realized the gravity of what I had deleted, his expression changed. "Tyson. That was a crucial system. How are we supposed to work without it? Without that, every department, the entire company, will come to a halt." He yelled furiously, his face red with anger. "Tyson, what have you done? If there's any damage, I'll demand compensation from you." Did he not realize his contradiction? I reminded him of the agreement we had signed in the hallway that day. "You signed a contract, didn't you? It stated that if I didn't erase all traces of my presence, I'd be liable for damages. This situation doesn't match up with your own terms or the contract." Contract. Explaining the situation to the bewildered employees left them all speechless. Then, keeping my composure, I continued. "Well, I'll be clocking out. Tomorrow's my last day, which is just for farewells anyway, so I won't be doing any work. I'll be officially resigning then." Ignoring Mr. Ingram's attempts to call me back, I left the company. The next day, a tense atmosphere filled the systems department as Mr. Ingram showed up, looking bruised and battered. I was as surprised as anyone and asked what happened, only to hear that he had finally understood the gravity of his actions after realizing the system I deleted was patented. He'd hit the bottle hard out of despair. Patented? No way. So now we're stuck if he doesn't approve it, but he deleted it? I mean, sure, I told him to erase everything. But who would have expected it was patented? Listening to his muttering, Brian explained with a shrug. On his way home, he got caught in sudden rain, slipped, and fell into an outdoor garbage bin outside a restaurant. He stormed into the place in anger, only to slip again and hit his face on a nearby table. Hearing Brian's account, I muttered to myself, talk about adding insult to injury. As Mr. Ingram sniffled, tears streaming down his face, I spoke up. "Crying won't help you now. You created this mess, and as for your injuries, you brought those on yourself. Whether from shame or exhaustion, Mr. Ingram sat slumped, muttering incoherently. Then suddenly, he started pulling at his hair and shouted, "Why is it always like this? No matter how hard I try, nothing ever goes right. I was given this position from my grandfather, as his only grandson. But now, damn it all." He seemed lost in frustration, and everyone around him was at a loss for words. I decided to be direct with him. "Didn't I tell you crying won't solve anything?" Startled by the volume of my voice, Mr. Ingram flinched, his shoulders jerking as he turned to face me with tearful eyes. "You're only 30. To the world, that's still young and inexperienced. Your grandfather likely hoped you'd carry on his legacy. But somewhere along the way, you lost your direction. Now, you've wandered so far you can't find your way back. While nurturing young talent is vital, it's equally important to respect those who've laid the groundwork. Isn't that right?" Mr. Ingram nodded weakly, then broke down, sobbing openly. "What do we do now?" Brian asked, still visibly exasperated. I let out a small sigh and said to Mr. Ingram, "You still have room to grow. If you're going to turn back, now is the time. If you push any further, you'll lose everyone's support. But if you show the right attitude, I'll restore the data from the backup." At this, Mr. Ingram slowly stood and bowed deeply to me. "Yes, you're absolutely right. It seems I took a wrong path somewhere. I sensed it but got caught up in having everyone listen to me. I'm truly sorry." Accepting his apology, I shrugged, sat down at my computer, and restored the data. "I'll be expecting great things from you, Mr. Ingram." He didn't respond to my words. Instead, he stood there trembling, his head bowed low. After that, as planned, I made my rounds to say my goodbyes and left the company I dedicated so many years to. The female employees gifted me a large bouquet and several cards filled with personal messages, secretly written and passed around. I hadn't expected such warm messages from people outside of the systems department. Mr. Ingram once mentioned making this a youth-centered company, and I don't necessarily disagree with that idea. But then, Brian continued, "It's undeniable that our predecessors laid the foundation here. Without them, we wouldn't have a place to work today. There's tension now between the younger generation and the older employees, but I think it's essential to break down that barrier. If we respect one another, we can avoid unnecessary conflict." It was a reasonable point. Of course, we, the older generation, must update our mindsets and ways of working to understand younger generations better. At the same time, it's crucial for younger employees to respect those who built the world they're part of and not push only for their own agenda. Hostility leads nowhere. Having experienced that in my youth, I try to teach the young ones proper manners and perspectives in the workplace, all while respecting their views. Naturally, as a senior employee, I sometimes took on the role of the bad guy. But by doing so, I hope to create an environment where future generations could work comfortably and develop their own critical thinking skills. I believe that's what it truly means to be seasoned by society. Thank you for everything." I bent low in a deep bow. Though I may have taught my younger colleagues about work and manners, they also taught me many valuable lessons. Lauren, thank you for your insightful advice on handling my teenage daughter. Kevin, thanks for always gathering and sharing the latest systems info with everyone. Nora, thank you for taking on the small tasks, even when I didn't ask. Calling each person by name and expressing my gratitude, I could see their eyes glistening with emotion. Then, I called that one name. Brian. "Yes," he responded, voice cracking in nervousness, something I wasn't used to from him. Seeing his reaction, I couldn't help but laugh. "Thank you for introducing me to good drinks." "Yes, wait, drinks? That's it? Ha ha. It's a compliment. Plus, I appreciate you always joining this old man for a drink whenever I asked. I'm also grateful to your wife for her understanding." To me, you were more than just a colleague." With that, his face turned bright red. "Hey now, don't go blushing from an old man's words," I joked, filling the office with warm laughter. Leaving with the bouquet and farewells, I walked out of the building and noticed Mr. Ingram standing out front. Beside him was an elderly man in a wheelchair. Mr. Underwood. There was no mistaking him. It was Mr. Underwood, who had stepped down due to declining health and cognitive ability, keeping him from any non-family interactions until now. "I just got a call from the hospital," Mr. Ingram explained. "My grandfather insisted on going out today. The nurse said he kept saying, 'Today's important.' The only special thing today is your last day, Tyson, so I asked him, and he told me to hurry and bring him here." As Mr. Ingram finished speaking, Mr. Underwood motioned for me to come closer. His voice was faint, trembling and raspy, barely audible. Yet somehow, I understood what he meant. "Mr. Underwood, I'm the one who's grateful. Thank you for remembering my birthday." Hearing that, he gave me a joyful smile. A few days later, I received the news that Mr. Underwood had passed. However, I didn't feel much sadness. At the funeral, his face appeared peaceful, almost as if he were smiling. "Thank you for not abandoning me, even after all I've put you through. I promise to cherish the company my grandfather built once more. Thanks to your influence, none of the employees have left. Truly, thank you so much." As Mr. Ingram bowed deeply, I placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Knowing you've changed gives me reassurance. I was beginning to wonder how I could help your team if you continued down that path. But now that worry has turned out to be unfounded in the best way possible, I look forward to seeing what you'll achieve." Hearing my words, Mr. Ingram looked back at me with a refreshed expression. He replied that he would strive to become a president as remarkable as his grandfather. "Hey, kid, would you let me work here?" Those words left me speechless. In front of me was an elderly man in a wheelchair, clearly advanced in age. The idea that he wanted to work seemed like a joke. No, I mean, you really shouldn't push yourself." Sensing my hesitation, the old man smiled softly and shook his head. "It's fine. I'll work for just 50 cents a day. I've got something I want to do here." This mysterious old man appeared before me right after I had lost both my mother and grandmother. Little did I know that this man would turn my life upside down. And his true identity was, "My name is Jake, and I'm 27. I had lived with my mother and grandmother for as long as I could remember. Even though it was a single-parent household, my mother and grandmother were always bright and full of smiles. Jake, look at this. Oh yeah, it's ripening nicely. Want to pick this tomato, Jake? Yeah. I'll do it. I naturally started helping with farming, which became both our livelihood and the center of our lives. We weren't rich, but the vegetables and fruits we grew in our small field provided us with a fulfilling life. Mom, today's tomatoes are super sweet. Right? This year's harvest seems especially good. I'm glad. Sorry for always making you help, Jake. But Grandma and I will take care of the field, so you should enjoy being a kid, playing and studying. Those simple conversations were my happiness. After graduating high school, I left home and became an office worker. Are you sure about skipping college? My mom and grandma repeatedly asked if I was really okay with not going to college when I told them I wanted to work after graduation. It's not that I hated studying, but I didn't feel a strong urge to keep doing it either. More than anything, I just wanted to make life easier for the two of them as quickly as possible. Farming is tough work. You're always dealing with nature, and the physical labor is often grueling. I wanted to start earning money as soon as possible. I'm home. Grandma, Mom. My job was a bit far, so I had to move out. Honestly, living alone for the first time was lonely. And as I faced the challenges of working, there were many days when I felt like I might break down. But knowing that my two favorite people were always waiting for me to come home kept me going. On weekends, I'd return home, and we'd share meals made from the vegetables they'd grown. Those moments brought me peace. What? What did you just say? But one day, when I was 26, fate suddenly took away the two most important people in my life. The police informed me that my mother and grandmother had died in a car accident, and I couldn't process the reality. Why did this happen? I remember standing frozen after receiving that call from the police. Time passed in a blur with funerals and paperwork. Thank you so much. I bowed my head and saw off the people who had come to the funeral. Then I returned to my childhood home for the first time in a while. I couldn't just wallow in grief. I needed to start cleaning up the house. I'm home. The familiar, cheerful voices welcoming me back were no longer there. I deeply regretted not having done more for them while they were alive. I should have shown more gratitude to my mom and grandma. Now, my childhood home no longer carried the warmth it once did, but instead confronted me with the cold, harsh reality. I should have realized sooner. But now, it's too late. When I walked into the living room, the walls were crowded with pictures of me. There was my beaming smile as a child, the slightly surprised look on my face when I first learned to ride a bike, and photos from my elementary, middle, and high school entrance and graduation ceremonies. Each one was a testament to how much my mother and grandmother cherished me. As the memories of being loved came flooding back, my heart warmed. They loved me so much. Tears welled up and streamed down my face uncontrollably. The loss of both of them felt unreal, and the regret of not being able to repay their kindness weighed heavily on my heart. If only I had expressed my gratitude more, so much more. I should have kept showing it, whether through words or gifts. I stood frozen, unable to stop the tears. After crying for what felt like forever in the living room, I noticed the room my mom and grandma used as an office. There are so many papers. I had always known it as their workroom, and I never really went inside. But when I entered, I found the desk piled high with documents. Contracts related to farm work and bills I had never seen before were scattered around. What were they dealing with all this time? I started going through the papers, but I couldn't even tell which ones were important or necessary. Still, I kept reading and trying to figure out the contracts. Thinking about what my mother and grandmother must have felt as they continued farming, always with a smile, while working in this room. It makes my chest ache. Ouch, my shoulders are stiff. After hours of sorting through the papers, a thick file caught my eye. Inside were detailed records of transactions, income, and expenses. What I found was shocking. I had no idea the farm was in such bad shape. The income was meager, while the expenses were overwhelming. On top of that, there were unpaid taxes. And it wasn't just one or two. Why did they keep this struggle hidden from me? While I was living my carefree life, what must they have been feeling as they worked? The thought of their burden made my chest tighten. Even though things were so tough, they kept working hard for me. I had no idea how much effort they had put in. I didn't know what they had gone through to keep this farm going. As I stood there, faced with this harsh reality, I began to think about what I should do. After much reflection, I made my decision. I would quit my job and return home. I resolved to start farming from scratch, to protect the land my mother and grandmother had cherished. If I couldn't repay them in life, at least I can protect this land. But the reality was harsh. I only knew bits and pieces about farming, things my mom and grandma had casually taught me, and I didn't really understand the details. Still, I thought I could manage somehow. But standing in the field, I realized I had no idea where to start. Well, I guess I'll just have to try. I grabbed the shovel and stabbed it into the ground. And just like that, the handle snapped off. Great! Is there a spare somewhere? I headed to the shed where the farming tools were stored, intending to take some out. I looked around the dusty space. Once I took a good look inside, I saw that most of the tools were falling apart. Many of them were unusable, likely due to lack of proper maintenance. I'll have to take care of these too. With so much to do everywhere, I felt overwhelmed and exhausted, eventually crouching down on the spot. I let out a sigh, but even then, I didn't want to give up. I started watching farming videos on YouTube and reading books. Gradually, I began to build up my knowledge of farming. But, of course, knowledge alone wasn't enough. I lacked the physical strength, skills, and experience, everything, really. Why is this so difficult? I worked tirelessly every day, but there was hardly any harvest, and the farm continued to run in the red. Then, one day, something happened. In the crisp morning air, I was walking towards the field as usual. My body, still unaccustomed to farm work, was a bit tired, but I had no choice but to keep going. But that morning, I saw something different. There was someone sitting at the edge of the field. Who is that? Do I know anyone around here who uses a wheelchair? The person sitting there was an elderly man in a wheelchair. I racked my brain, trying to recall if any of the neighbors fit the description, but I couldn't think of anyone. As I slowly approached, I decided to speak to him. Feeling a bit nervous, I carefully walked up to the old man and greeted him. Good morning. Can I help you with something? After a moment, the old man slowly turned to me and gave a gentle smile. Good morning. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? Yes, it is. Good morning. I felt a little flustered by his greeting. Who is this man? Why is he here? A brief silence followed as I wondered. Hey, kid, would you let me work here? Those words left me stunned and speechless. In front of me was an elderly man in a wheelchair, clearly advanced in age. The idea that he wanted to work seemed absurd. No, I mean, you really shouldn't push yourself. Sensing my hesitation, the old man smiled softly and shook his head. It's fine. I'll work for just 50 cents a day. I've got something I want to do here. His words only added to my confusion. 50 cents a day sounded like a joke, and I had no idea what he meant by having something he wanted to do here. I couldn't understand why he was interested in this field. The soil was becoming quite poor. But why this remote farm? The old man looked at me for a moment before smiling again. Kid, this field still holds a lot of potential. I can see it. So, will you let me help? His serious gaze made me hesitate for a moment. It was true that the field was in rough shape, and I couldn't handle it on my own. But I didn't want to let him overexert himself. But, please, don't push yourself. Farming takes a lot of physical strength, and there are risks too. The old man raised his hand to stop me mid-sentence. Don't worry. You're struggling too, aren't you? Let me help with what I can. Besides, I've got a bit of knowledge and experience. His words made me stop and think deeply for a moment. Then, I happened to notice his hands. Though a bit worn, they were large and strong hands that had worked hard. They reminded me of my grandmother's and mother's hands. At that moment, I felt a natural sense of wanting to accept his help, May I ask your name? The old man paused, seeming to think for a bit. Just call me Doc, he said with a playful grin. I couldn't help but laugh a little. Doc? Yes. My name isn't important. His response surprised me, but there was something about his mysterious air that made me not want to question it further. In the end, I agreed. Understood. In that case, I'll pay you $4,000 a month. 50 cents a day isn't going to work. So, please, help me. I said that and gave Doc a big smile. And so, our partnership began, Doc and I, working together side by side. From that day forward, Doc started taking care of the tools daily, and one by one, the unusable equipment was restored. His skill was remarkable, so much so that, while I stood by in amazement, he even managed to repair the broken tractor. Wow! How do you know so much? When I asked in awe, Doc smiled and said, It's the wisdom of age. Plus, when you've farmed as long as I have, this much is second nature. His humble attitude made me even more grateful for his presence. The thought crossed my mind that Doc might be someone special. But since he never brought it up, I felt it would be rude to pry, so I kept my curiosity to myself. One day, while working silently, Doc began mixing manure and fertilizer. What are you making? Compost. If we spread this over the field, the soil will come back to life. The earth is a living thing too. Give it the nutrients it needs, and the crops will flourish. Following his advice, I spread the compost over the field. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle changes in the field. The soil became softer, and the crops looked healthier and more vibrant. The effects of Doc's care were visible, it felt like magic. I can't believe we're seeing results this quickly. Take care of the soil, and it will repay you. Now, just keep up with the maintenance. As the days went by, I started learning the essence of farming from Doc's words and actions. The field improved day by day, and little by little, we began to see progress. Then, 2 weeks after Doc had arrived, a phone call came into the office that would change everything. The call was from Robert, a renowned chef who ran a famous restaurant in Tokyo. Robert frequently appeared on cooking shows and was one of the most celebrated chefs of the time. I'm sorry for the sudden call. Recently, I bought some tomatoes from your farm at a roadside market, and I was amazed by the taste. It brought back memories of the flavors I knew as a child. Hearing his words made my heart race with excitement. Really? Thank you so much. Robert went on to say that he wanted to use our tomatoes in his restaurant. It was an order larger than anything I had ever imagined. Thank you. I can't believe our tomatoes are being praised like this. I'll get them ready right away and deliver them to you. After hanging up the phone, I rushed to tell Doc the news. Listen, Doc. We just got a call from a famous restaurant in Tokyo. They want to use our tomatoes. Doc listened, then smiled gently and nodded. That's great. Your hard work is paying off. No way. I haven't done anything. This is all thanks to you. Doc seemed a little embarrassed by my words. I felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect for Doc as his words sank in. In that moment, I realized that both this farm and my life were being saved because of him. Since supplying the tomatoes to Robert's restaurant, the phone at the office hadn't stopped ringing. Orders were pouring in not just from the local area but from outside the prefecture as well. Not only the tomatoes, but the summer vegetables Doc had worked on were gaining a reputation. Wow, another order just came in. The tomato orders just won't stop. I was loading up boxes of freshly harvested vegetables from the field, overwhelmed but thrilled by the demand. It was exhausting to keep up with the constant calls, but deep down, I couldn't have been happier. I wished my mother and grandmother could see the farm as it was now. If only Doc had come while they were still alive. But there's no point in thinking about what ifs. I murmured quietly, shaking off the sentimental thoughts and returning to my work. Just then, I felt someone's gaze and looked up to see Doc smiling at me with a reassuring expression. "Doc, what's up?" When I asked, Doc simply shook his head and smiled. "Oh, nothing. Just thinking how hard you're working. Hard-working guys like you will be popular, you know." He let out a hearty laugh, and in that moment, I felt a strange tug at my chest. It was a familiar expression. Where have I seen that before? But I couldn't quite place it, leaving a vague sense of unease lingering in the back of my mind. The feeling only lasted a moment. Never mind, I can't figure it out. And no way. I'm not popular, don't tease me like that. I puffed out my cheeks a little, and Doc laughed even more. That afternoon, while I was doing paperwork in the office, Samuel, a fellow farmer, stopped by to check in. Samuel is the person who lives closest to me. He's been my neighbor for as long as I can remember. "Hey, Jake. Your vegetables are making quite a name for themselves, aren't they? I came by to see what all the fuss is about. How did this happen so suddenly?" Samuel looked puzzled, so I proudly explained. "Actually, I got some major help. Honestly, it's all thanks to him." "Help?" "Yeah, his name is Doc." At the mention of Doc, Samuel looked confused. "Want to take a look at the farm?" When Samuel eagerly agreed, we headed outside together. As we walked, we spotted Doc working in the distance. When we got close enough for Samuel to see his face, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. "Ha! What's wrong?" Samuel didn't respond, his eyes fixed on document. Why is he here?" Samuel shouted in surprise and rushed over to Doc. "Hey! Is that really you, Kenneth? You're Kenneth, aren't you?" I was stunned by Samuel's words. "Kenneth?" I had suspected Doc wasn't his real name, but I never imagined Samuel would know him. But more than that, the words "you're back" stuck in my mind. Wait, what's going on? "Samuel, you know Doc? Know him?" "Of course I do." "Wait, Kenneth, you didn't tell Jake?" As both Samuel and I voiced our questions, Doc let out a small sigh. "Samuel, I didn't expect to be found like this." Doc smiled wryly and fell silent, seemingly deep in thought. Finally, he began to speak. "I suppose it's time I tell you the truth. If you don't mind, could we sit down and talk inside?" As I waited for his words, my heart raced. I had avoided asking about Doc's true identity all this time, but in this moment, everything was about to be revealed. We moved to the living room, and together with Samuel, we listened to Kenneth's story. I sat there, tense, straining to hear every word this man in front of me was about to say. "To be honest, this might come as a shock, but I'm your grandfather, Jake." The moment I heard those words, I was so stunned I couldn't speak. The grandfather I never knew existed was right in front of me. I'd grown up without any knowledge of him, and I had always assumed I didn't have a grandfather. I was too overwhelmed to say anything, and seeing that, he continued. "I studied agriculture in college a long time ago and started farming on this land myself. Grandfather had been a renowned agricultural researcher, but he also loved working with his hands, connecting with the soil. He met my grandmother, and together they lived a life of farming. I met your grandmother here and we got married. Those were truly happy days. Every day was fulfilling. We spent all our time working the fields together from morning till night. As he spoke, he smiled fondly at the memories. That's right, Jake. The two of them were really inseparable. They were famous for it around here, Samuel added. I see. Grandfather seemed a little embarrassed by Samuel's comment. But as he moved on to the next part of his story, his expression darkened. One day, I got a call from the university, asking if I'd return to continue my research. I was torn because I loved research. But before I could make up my mind, your grandmother told me to go. At the time, your mother, Mary, was still young. But I chose to go back to the university. I listened quietly. Mary was my mother's name. To think he went back to university when my mother was still so young. My grandmother must have had an incredibly hard time. And yet, I had no idea my grandfather had taken such a path in life. But why didn't you stay with them? It was a university far enough away that I had to take a plane. At first, I made time to come back, but eventually, I got so absorbed in my research that I started drifting away from my family. Regret was clear in my grandfather's voice as he spoke those words. Looking back, it was true that he had been able to fully pursue the research he loved, and that must have been fulfilling for him. But my grandmother, left to handle everything alone, must have had an incredibly hard time. Housework, raising a child, and farming. Even for a man, farming by himself would have been tough enough. I deeply regret it. I should have come home more often, paid more attention to my family. It was my mother, he said, who was most upset with him for staying away. As she grew older and realized the situation at home, she sided firmly with my grandmother. I could imagine how painful it must have been for her, never having her father around for birthdays, school events, or anything important. Mom was so heartbroken. When she was in middle school, she had enough and lashed out at him. My grandfather recalled how she'd yelled at him over the phone. Even though this all happened before I was born, I was shocked to hear about it. In the end, I failed to take care of my family. We lived apart for many years, though we never officially divorced. I see. I didn't know any of that. But what about the wheelchair? Grandfather quietly began to explain. I've only been in a wheelchair for the past 2 years. When I was fully immersed in my research at the university, I was overworked, staying late into the night with experiments and studies. My body couldn't keep up, and one day, I collapsed from exhaustion. Unfortunately, I was at the top of a flight of stairs. Grandfather had pushed himself to the limit and collapsed. Since it happened at the top of the stairs, he fell all the way down. That's when he injured his spine. Despite undergoing surgery, he lost the use of his legs and was confined to a wheelchair. I debated whether to tell them about it. Suddenly calling after all those years to say I was now in a wheelchair. I agonized over it. But no answer came. After all the years I'd stayed silent, I feared they might ask, so what? In the end, I never reached out to them. A look of anguish appeared on my grandfather's face. Even now, it seemed he was still searching for the right answer, wondering what he could have done differently. After the accident, I thought about so many things. Should I go back home and do what farming I could? Or should I return to the university, which was willing to accommodate me in a wheelchair? I was torn. But in the end, I felt like I hadn't finished my research, and I needed just a little more time. So, I wrote a letter to the two of them. I never got a reply, though. His voice was filled with frustration and regret. He had wanted to come home, yet he chose to keep pursuing his dream. And before he knew it, time had slipped away. Caught between wanting to repair his family relationships and his passion for research, he had been stuck in limbo. And then, I completed my research. I was satisfied with the results. I finally worked up the courage to return home. But just as I made that decision, I got the news that your mother and grandmother had passed away. My grandfather's voice trembled. And so did his hands. Years of putting off coming home had resulted in the loss of his beloved wife and daughter. I couldn't even begin to imagine the depth of that pain. I wanted to rush back immediately. But my body, weakened by illness, wouldn't cooperate. More than that, I was overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness. I hadn't been there for them, hadn't done anything for them. How could I possibly face this house again? Did I even have the right to return? That feeling, he said, had kept him from moving. As he whispered those words, my grandfather looked so small. Then, I heard from others that you had taken over the farm. I heard that you were protecting the fields on your own. That was the only thing that gave me any comfort. So, I decided to return, even if it was too late. I thought that if there was anything I could still do, I'd do it. Even if you couldn't forgive me, Jake. Hearing his words, I was overcome with emotion. The fact that my grandfather, now in a wheelchair and having kept his distance from the family for so long, had returned like this. It was a sign that he was facing his past and trying to make amends. Samuel nodded quietly in understanding. So that's what it was, Kenneth. You've been carrying that regret all this time. Grandfather lowered his gaze slightly and continued. It wasn't until I lost the people I cherished most that I realized what I'd done. But by then, I didn't have the courage to come back. You were the only one left. My grandson. I couldn't abandon you. But I couldn't bear to call myself your grandfather, so I became Doc. Hearing my grandfather's feelings, my heart felt full. For a while, I sat in silence, listening to his words, unsure of where to begin. There were so many emotions swirling inside me, too many to easily put into words. But as I looked at my grandfather sitting there in front of me, I felt the need to speak the feelings in my heart, just as he had done for me. Thank you for coming back. The words flowed out naturally. I had thought I would be on my own forever. With my grandmother and mother gone, I'd felt like I had no family left. My estranged father had passed away as well. But now, sitting here in front of me, was my grandfather. That fact alone was a source of immense relief. I'm really happy. Because now I know I'm not alone anymore. With Grandma and Mom gone, I thought I had no one left to call family. I could see tears welling up in my grandfather's eyes. After taking a deep breath, I began to speak to him. As I listened to my grandfather's story, a memory from my childhood resurfaced. I wanted to share that memory with him. I remembered something. When I was little, I asked Grandma about you. At my words, my grandfather looked at me in surprise. I could see a hint of worry in his eyes. He was probably anxious about what my grandmother had told me about him. I remember asking Grandma once, all my friends have grandpas, but I don't. Why don't I have a grandpa? I've never forgotten how she answered. I followed the memory as I shared it with my grandfather. She smiled gently and said, Jake's grandpa is studying hard to make sure the vegetables grow delicious for everyone. I saw deep emotion on my grandfather's face. I still remember the look on her face when she said it. Looking back now, she seemed so proud and happy. I felt proud too, knowing my grandpa was doing something so special. For a moment, my grandfather didn't say anything. My grandfather listened quietly, seemingly absorbing every word I said. Then, gradually, large tears began to fall from his eyes. Seeing this, my heart filled to the brim. How had I forgotten this memory for so long? I wondered if, had I spoken of my grandfather more often, it might have softened things between my mother, grandmother, and him. Thank you. She truly was an incredible woman. I've come this far because of her support. Even now, I'm so deeply grateful. His words warmed my heart. Perhaps to others, and even to my mother, our family seemed unconventional. And I owe your mother an apology. His voice carried a deep sense of regret. Hearing about how he had once left his family behind to immerse himself in research now felt like a distant past. It's okay. Mom could be pretty stubborn. I think, deep down, she wanted to see you again. That's what I believe. With my grandfather here now, I had no desire to blame him. Grandpa, thank you so much for coming back. Let's keep working together on this farm. I still have a lot to learn, but I'm happy to have you here with me. You know, I always wanted a grandpa. I was jealous of the kids who had one. My grandfather nodded quietly at my words. He then rolled his wheelchair closer to me and gently took my hand. His hand was, as always, knobby and strong. Tanned from the sun, with small scars from years of hard work. I squeezed his hand firmly in return. It was warm, and it filled me with a deep sense of reassurance. I'm so grateful that you've been taking care of this farm and this home. Now, we'll be able to bring new life to this land together. That's the greatest joy I could ask for. Do you think they'll forgive me? Your mother and grandmother? Hearing that, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. Though the sadness of losing my grandmother and mother would never disappear, reconnecting with my grandfather had brought a new sense of hope. Of course. They'll say, "Welcome home. They've been waiting for you, Grandpa." As I confidently reassured him, he wiped away his tears. Samuel, meanwhile, had been crying so hard that I couldn't tell when he had started. That's wonderful. Truly wonderful. If there's anything I can do, just say the word. If you need more hands, I'll rally the others. Really? Thank you so much. Thank you, Samuel. I'll be counting on you. No matter what challenges might come our way, I knew we could overcome them together. With that belief, I firmly decided to move forward with my grandfather by my side. Thank you. Let's keep working hard together, Grandpa. I squeezed his hand even tighter. And so, my grandfather and I worked as a team, finally getting the farm back on track. We began receiving orders for our vegetables from all over the country, and before long, we had paid off all the debt that had once burdened us. Both financially and emotionally, we had found stability. Hey, Jake. Come over here. What is it, Grandpa? Every day, my grandfather watched over the fields with care, while I followed closely behind, taking on the work. After we discovered our family bond, there was a brief period where we weren't sure how to act around each other. But now, that awkwardness was long gone. After all, we were the only family we had left. Even though we had been apart for so long, we had restored the bond between us. In the quiet joy of each day, we lived our lives with gratitude. I'm here to help. Since then, Samuel had started coming over to lend a hand whenever he had free time. To be honest, with all the orders pouring in, we didn't have enough people to handle the harvest. Not only did Samuel come, but he also introduced others to help out. The farm, which had once been run by me alone, was now bustling with people coming and going. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Together, we worked hard, sweating as we harvested the vegetables. Farming was tough and physically demanding, but I loved the feeling of working up a sweat. Look, Grandpa. It's another beautiful day. The sky is so clear. You're right. It really is a beautiful day. We all stood for a moment, gazing at the bright blue sky. The air was fresh, and the breeze felt nice. With each day filled with small, simple joys, we walked through the fields, laughing together. This became our new everyday life. If you get this right, I'll make you the president. And if you don't want that, I'll do whatever you ask. How about it? No complaints now, right? At our middle school reunion, a beautiful CEO's daughter, whom I hadn't seen in years, challenged me with a tough question. She seemed to dislike me since back then, and now she sneered, mocking me for only having a high school diploma. Her face bore a smug expression, as if she were saying, "I bet you can't solve this." Honestly, I didn't want either prize, but I couldn't turn down a fight when one was handed to me. As I looked over the question, well, I had a bit of trouble with this one myself. It shouldn't be so easy for you either, right? Fine. I'll give you a little hint. Oh, sorry. It was so easy I already solved it. Ha! Actually, you know. I shot a smirk at the stunned CEO's daughter. My name is Rick Mitchell, 32 years old. My work involves the ocean. But I'm not out on the sea like a fisherman. In the mild climate of the Seto Inland Sea, I run a fish farming business, raising red sea bream and flounder. This fish farm was started by my grandfather. When I graduated high school, I took over the business. My family includes my dad, my mom, and my sister, who's 8 years older, making us a family of 4. Dad works as a banker at a regional bank, and mom is a homemaker. With a strict dad, a gentle mom, and a caring sister, I had a pretty happy life. Since I was young, I loved going to my grandparents' house. Every summer break, I'd stay there for a long time, surrounded by the ocean and mountains. Hey, Rick. Let's go to the ocean. Wait up, Grandpa. Each morning, I'd head to the sea with my grandpa and help feed the red sea bream and flounder on the farm. It was just feeding them, but with such a large farm, it felt like hard work for a kid. Still, every day I'd help without skipping. And the breakfast afterward always tasted incredible. In the afternoons, I'd swim in the sea or catch bugs with friends who lived nearby, enjoying my childhood to the fullest. I remember feeling so happy because the local kids always welcomed me, even though I only came during summer. But when I was about to graduate high school, Grandpa fell ill. The problem was how to keep the fish farm running. My dad, with his banking job, couldn't take over the business. Then I'll take over Grandpa's fish farm. Are you sure, Rick? You were planning to go to college. I'm sure. I'd hate to see Grandpa's fish farm go away. Dad tried to talk me out of it, but I couldn't bear the thought of letting my grandfather's fish farm go under. With that strong conviction, I convinced him. So, I gave up on going to college, moved in with my grandparents, and started helping out at the farm. Though I knew the work was tough, I had watched for years and had a general idea of the steps. A veteran named Sam, who had worked with Grandpa for years, taught me the detailed work and helped me get through. Sam had known me since I was little and had always treated me like a grandson when I'd come to help at the farm. He was both kind and strict as he taught me. After a while, Grandpa's health improved enough that he could start working with us again. Rick, I'm sorry. You've done so much for us. Don't worry about it. I did it because I wanted to. Rick's pretty efficient, so it's been a big help. You should take it easy, old man. Hey now, I'm not ready to lose to the young ones just yet. At Grandpa's words, Sam and I looked at each other and laughed. Then, one day, I got a call from Mom. Apparently, an invitation postcard for my middle school reunion had arrived at my parents' house. When I graduated from middle school, we moved due to Dad's job transfer, leaving behind the neighborhood I'd known. So, I hadn't kept in touch with any of my classmates since then. I wonder how everyone's doing. I'm kind of curious, but I just don't feel like going to the reunion. As I was thinking that, Mom unusually encouraged me to attend. Usually, when I say I'm not going, you just say him without much interest. When I asked her why, she explained what the postcard had said. Apparently, this reunion was a big deal because our 9th grade teacher, Mr. Thompson, was retiring. And the gathering would double as his retirement celebration. Hey, Rick, maybe you should go this time? You always skip these things. Yeah. Mr. Thompson did a lot for me. I thought it over. I'd gotten invitations before but never went to any of the reunions. It was because there was one woman I really didn't want to see. It wasn't like we dated or broken up or anything. But for some reason, she had always disliked me in middle school, almost like she saw me as an enemy. What puzzled me was that I had no idea why she'd felt that way. If I'd actually done something to her, I'd apologize. But since I didn't remember doing anything, there wasn't even a clear reason to make amends. What's with that bedhead? So uncool. No wonder you can't get any attention looking like that. What's that handwriting? It's so messy I can't even read it. Really shows who you are as a person. Try writing neater, will you? She would make comments like that, always putting me down. Over time, her presence became something I resented, and my grades even started to slip, worrying my family and teachers back then. I wanted to ask her why she acted that way toward me, but I never got the chance before we moved right after graduation. I still wanted to know the reason, but facing her now would probably just mean hearing more of her jabs, which didn't exactly excite me. As I was mulling this over on the phone with Mom. Hey, Rick. Are you even listening? Oh. Sorry, just got lost in thought. Good grief. So, what's it going to be? Should I mark you down as attending? Yeah, go ahead. I do want to see Mr. Thompson, after all. After some hesitation, I decided I really should go this time to thank Mr. Thompson for everything he'd done. I double-checked the date with Mom and made up my mind to attend. Then, I shared the news with Grandpa and Sam. Oh, a reunion, huh? That's great. Maybe you'll finally meet someone special. Rick could find himself a lovely bride, no doubt. Guys, reunions aren't for that. I laughed off their teasing and headed back to my parents' house. After dropping off my bags at the old place and chatting with Mom a bit, I headed to the hotel where the reunion was being held. At the entrance, I checked in and pinned on the name tag provided. Entering the banquet hall, I noticed it was a standing buffet setup. Looks like a lot of people came since it's also a celebration for Mr. Thompson. I glanced around the room. Even though it had been since middle school, some people hadn't changed much at all. Hey! Are you Rick? No way. And look at you, totally tanned. Well, I run a fish farm by the ocean. Of course, I'm tanned. You vanished right after graduation. We were pretty worried, you know? Yeah. None of the high schools around here had you. Haha, my bad. Talking with everyone brought a flood of memories back. After a while, the reunion officially began. After the organizers' opening remarks, a toast was proposed, and everyone raised their glasses in a celebratory cheer. Then came time for chatting and enjoying the meal. I decided to greet Mr. Thompson first, grabbing a bottle of beer and making my way over to him. Mr. Thompson, thank you for all your hard work over the years. Oh, Rick. How have you been? Thanks to you, I've been doing well. With that, I poured some beer into his glass. Mr. Thompson specialized in social studies. He was usually a strict teacher, but he was also incredibly caring. Thanks to you, I've been able to get along with my family, even now. I really appreciate what you did for me back then. Good to hear. I heard you moved right after graduation, so I was a bit worried about you. Mr. Thompson smiled, eyes crinkling warmly. Mr. Thompson, Just as I was about to continue our conversation, more classmates began gathering around Mr. Thompson. I wanted to talk with him more, but with people crowding in one after another, there was no chance for a relaxed conversation. Oh well, I'll talk to him later, I thought, and returned to the group of classmates to reminisce about old memories and chat about what everyone was up to. Some had found success, while others were still facing challenges. But we all agreed it was wonderful to reunite like this. As the reunion reached its midpoint, a bingo game began. Just as the energy picked up, a stunning woman with flowing hair entered the room a bit late. People started murmuring, "Who is that? She's gorgeous." The whole room began buzzing, but I recognized her immediately. Her name was Emma Harris. She'd been beautiful even in middle school, but seeing her now, more stunning than I could have expected, took me by surprise. The others soon realized she was Emma, too, and whispers spread as they noticed her. Listening in, I gathered that after high school, she'd gone to Tokyo University and even won the Miss Tokyo University title thanks to her looks. She was also the daughter of the president of Harris Foods and was now on the board there. But while everyone else admired her, I felt my body tense up. She was, after all, the reason I'd avoided previous reunions. Emma and I had shared the same class in 7th and 9th grades, but I'd always found her hard to be around. Or rather, I'd go so far as to say I outright disliked her. Every time we made eye contact, she would glare and quickly make some snide comment. And since I didn't understand why she treated me like that, it was baffling. How could I possibly like someone who openly disliked me? In academics, too, we'd always vied for the top 2 spots in our grade. Back then, the results for the top 10 students were posted at the front of the classroom after each term exam. Whenever she took first place, she'd ridicule me as if she'd won some grand prize. And when I came out on top, she'd get visibly frustrated, vowing to beat me next time. At first, I would respond, but it got tiring, so eventually, I just let it slide. But Emma kept up her one-sided rivalry, and I never understood why I deserved her scorn. Whenever she insulted me, I just gritted my teeth, waiting for the storm to pass. Seeing her now brought all those unpleasant memories flooding back, so I slipped toward the back of the room, hoping to avoid her. But Emma scanned the room and, catching sight of me, immediately started walking over. Great, she found me. I tried to dodge by talking to someone else, but it was too late. She reached me first. Oh, Rick, it's been a while. You look well. Yeah, thanks. You look well too, Emma. Of course. Keeping healthy is essential, don't you think? By the way, I heard you didn't go to college and are working on a fish farm? Well, yeah. That figures. The moment I walked in, I thought I smelled the ocean. As expected, Emma wasted no time throwing out a sarcastic comment, even going so far as to hold her nose while giving a smug little laugh. For some reason, she seemed to know that I worked at a fish farm. Did she dig into my background with her connections as a CEO's daughter? Or maybe she just asked someone here. Either way, whatever. Glancing around, I saw people nervously watching us from a distance. It felt just like old times. And I realized that Emma probably wanted to belittle me, the high school grad, and show off in front of everyone. She grabbed a whiteboard set up for entertainment, writing something on it. I sighed, recognizing this as her typical behavior, unchanged even now. Hey, everyone. Is there anyone here who can solve this problem? She called out, and silence fell over the room. Even the event organizer looked uneasy, watching to see how things would unfold. Knowing no one would be able to answer, Emma spun around and looked directly at me. Oh, that's right. I wonder if Rick, who jumped straight into the workforce with just a high school diploma, can solve this problem. The Miss Tokyo University beauty and CEO's daughter had likely chosen this tough question just to mess with me. The question, a challenging math problem in English, was clearly meant to trip me up. Classmates whispered to each other, "Do you think anyone can solve that?" while consulting those around them. What are you trying to prove with this out-of-the-blue problem? I muttered. Nothing, really. Oh. But if you get it right, I'll make you president. No way that's happening. I'm a CEO's daughter, I can make that happen. Or, if you don't want that, I'll do whatever you say. How about that? No excuses, right? She looked triumphantly at me, as if to say, I bet you can't solve this. Her words had the whole room buzzing, and classmates started cheering, caught up in the excitement. Honestly, I didn't care about either prize. But I couldn't walk away from a challenge, so I glanced over the problem. Oh, I see. Did you really think I couldn't solve this? Well, I struggled a bit with this one myself. As good as you were in school, this shouldn't be too easy for you, right? Fine. I'll give you a hint out of kindness, she said with a grin. Actually, I've already solved it, I replied casually. What? I easily wrote out the solution on the whiteboard. By the way, didn't you have something else to say? Nothing at all, she snapped. Really? Anyway, this is the right answer, isn't it? I asked, pointing to my solution. She glanced at the board, eyes wide, and whispered, Yes, it's correct. The crowd burst into cheers, congratulating me. Wow, Rick, that's awesome. You're still as sharp as ever. At that moment, Mr. Thompson, who had been quietly watching, walked over clapping. Well, that was quite entertaining. Oh, Mr. Thompson. I'm so sorry for the scene. Emma stammered, bowing her head. Then, she shot me a glare. Oh, scary. I muttered. No need for that look. Don't worry about it. But you may have picked the wrong opponent. You see, Rick competed as part of the Japanese team in the International Math Olympiad back in high school and won a gold medal. So, a problem like this is no challenge for him. At his words, Emma and the rest of the class turned to me, stunned. Oh, This isn't good. I was just about to say, Mr. Thompson. When? And by the way, Mr. Thompson added, Rick didn't just finish high school. He's a Stanford graduate. Just as I feared, he announced it to everyone. I couldn't help but hold my head in my hands. All eyes in the room turned to me at Mr. Thompson's words. Even Emma looked at me, her eyes wide in surprise. Oh, Mr. Thompson. I muttered. Oh, was that supposed to be a secret? My apologies, he said, smiling as he looked at me. It was clearly an apology without any real regret. Looking around, I noticed my classmates staring at me with wide-eyed admiration. Ow. Resigned, I took a deep breath. And I decided to explain. Well, right before I graduated high school, my grandfather, who ran the fish farm, got sick. With no one else to help him, I decided to skip college to work at the farm. But after my grandfather's health improved, and my dad retired and could help, I was able to step away from work and head to Stanford. I paused for a moment, but my classmates pressed in with more questions. So, what happened next? Why Stanford, specifically? My dad remembered that I'd originally wanted to go to college, so he encouraged me to pursue it. I thought studying would be useful, even if I continued running the farm. Plus, I had a friend from the math Olympiad who was also studying abroad, which made the idea more appealing. When I finished, the way they looked at me changed instantly, and I was bombarded with even more questions. Are the girls abroad really that cute? What's college like over there? Is it really hard to graduate? I answered as best I could, and as I did, the reunion neared its end. Scanning the room, I looked for Emma. I spotted her just as she was about to leave, so I took a deep breath, walked over, and called out. Hey, Emma, can we talk for a sec? What? When I called out to her, Emma shot me a sharp glare. Ignoring her obvious irritation, I decided to finally ask the question that had been on my mind all these years. So, back in middle school, I always wondered but never asked. Why did you treat me like an enemy? But she said nothing and turned to leave. I reminded her of her earlier words. You said if I answered the question, you'd do anything I asked, right? That made her stop in her tracks. After a pause, she turned to me, sighed deeply, and faced me with a look of resignation. Oh, you didn't need to sigh that heavily. It was during the summer of 7th grade. I went to my dad's office to drop something off, and I saw him kneeling in front of your dad. I was so shocked and humiliated that I ran off without even giving him what I brought. Wait, my dad made your dad kneel? Yes. Later, I saw your dad at school for open house, and I realized that he was the one my dad knelt before. I decided then to avenge my dad. I had no idea that happened. I couldn't find any words in response. Seeing my silence, Emma turned on her heel, and she left the venue without looking back. After returning to work, I decided to ask my dad, who had recently retired from the bank, about what had happened back then. I couldn't shake what Emma had told me and felt compelled to get to the truth. Oh, I remember that well. Mr. Harris suddenly knelt, and I was just as surprised. So, it really happened. Now, don't get the wrong idea. Of course, I immediately told him, please don't kneel. But he insisted, saying, not until you approve the loan. Wait, so you didn't make him do it? I'd never make someone do that. Our bank had already extended a loan of several $100,000 to Harris Foods, and they needed to make monthly payments. But since business was slow back then, Mr. Harris had asked for a deferral of those payments, a loan adjustment. So that's what happened. Dad continued his story, reminiscing about the past. Thanks to the reduced monthly payments, Harris Foods' finances gradually improved. But just as things were getting better, they requested an additional loan for equipment investments. Typically, when a loan is rescheduled, it's difficult to secure more funding. After all, they're already struggling to make regular payments. So granting another loan risks us not recovering the funds, which could spell disaster for the bank. Nodding in understanding, I realized that the kneeling must have happened during that exchange. So, what happened with the additional loan? We approved it. Mr. Harris and I put together a recovery plan, and we managed to secure that extra financing. Wow, Dad, that's impressive. Oh, it's nothing special. But looking back, Harris Foods really took off from there. It's a nostalgic memory. Dad's eyes softened as he spoke. I see. Thanks, Dad. I understand the situation now. Well, good. If you ever have more questions, just let me know. Thanks. I felt relieved, knowing Dad wasn't the type of person to force anyone to kneel. I wanted to clear up Emma's misunderstanding as soon as possible. So I called Harris Foods right away and asked to be connected to her. What do you want? I'm busy, she said coldly. About the other day. Oh? Are you trying to tell me I was wrong? Hearing her irritated tone, I hurried to explain. No, it's not that. There's just something important I want to tell you. Fine. I don't have time right now, but would next Sunday work? Yes, that works. Thank you. We agreed to meet at a cafe near the station on Sunday. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered an iced coffee, and waited for her. Right on time, Emma entered the cafe. Even in casual clothes, she looked stunning, making my heart skip a beat. At the reunion, she'd worn a chic suit, but today she had on a sleeveless top and slim capri pants, a much more relaxed look. I then shared with her everything Dad had told me. Wait, really? I had no idea that happened. She murmured, visibly taken aback. I was surprised to hear it myself. But that's why I wanted to clear things up with you. I see. I remember my dad was really troubled back then. He even developed a bald spot from stress, and he'd come home late every night. As a kid, I could tell he was under a lot of pressure. Emma looked down, her voice soft. As I wondered what to say, she continued. So, when I saw him kneeling, it really shocked me. I ended up assuming your father must be a terrible person. Well, seeing only that part, anyone might have thought the same, so I get it. But I'm sorry. As long as you know now that my dad isn't like that, it's all good. Yeah. Thanks to you, I understand now. Thank you. I'm glad. I mean, my dad isn't a bad guy, after all. He raised me, even though I'm not his own blood. Wait, what? What do you mean? She asked, looking at me in surprise and leaning in. Oh, I'm not actually my parents' biological child. Are you saying I'm not related by blood to anyone in my family? I was adopted. Emma covered her mouth in shock. So I continued explaining. When I was a baby, my biological parents died in a car accident. My grandparents on both sides were each living alone, barely making ends meet. So they couldn't take me in. That's awful. It is what it is. There was no one to take me in at first, but when my dad heard, he decided to adopt me into the Mitchell family. Apparently, he was my birth father's best friend. So I'm not related by blood to my dad, mom, sister, or even my grandpa. So, that's how it was. While I spoke casually, Emma looked visibly affected, a dark expression crossing her face. I hadn't meant to make her feel that way, and I scratched my head awkwardly. I'm sorry. I had no idea. Of course, you wouldn't. You're actually the first classmate I've ever told. But then, how did you realize that your current parents aren't your biological parents? Well, I noticed something was off right when I started 9th grade. My parents are both type O, and so is my sister. But I'm the only one with type A blood, even though two O-type parents can only have an O-type child, right? She nodded thoughtfully. So, yeah, I was really shaken when I realized I wasn't related by blood. I didn't know if I should even ask my parents about it. I was so stressed out that my grades dropped. Come to think of it, you weren't yourself for a while. Was that why? Yeah. But then, one day, my homeroom teacher, Mr. Thompson, noticed something was up and reached out to me. So I told him about it, that I was the only one in my family with a different blood type. Do you know what he said? Let's see. Emma folded her arms, thinking deeply. The answer was, "That's what you're worried about?" She laughed. That sounds just like Mr. Thompson, right? But his advice really helped me. Then he said something that stuck with me. The people you think of as your parents are your true parents, Rick. Does blood connection really matter? Even in marriage. People start as strangers, but they become family. You were raised with love in the Mitchell family. If you ask me, that's more than enough. But what do you think, Rick? Emma chuckled warmly. That's so like him. That's something few teachers would be able to say. Right? After that, he talked with my parents, which was a huge help because I didn't know how to bring it up myself. My parents said they'd plan to tell me once I became an adult, but I figured it out first. They must have been so flustered. Oh, they were totally panicking. It's funny looking back on it. Honestly, knowing my origin didn't cause me any turmoil. And that's thanks to Mr. Thompson. I see. But honestly, I think you and your dad look like true father and son. Really? Yeah, you both have the same expression, with your eyes softening when you smile. Ha ha. Guess we started looking alike from living together so long. Emma smiled and said, I'm sure that's the case. Her smile made my heart skip a beat, but I managed to keep the conversation going. Actually, I think I resemble my grandpa more than anyone else. You really love your grandpa, don't you? Yeah, both he and grandma have always been amazing, treating me like a real grandson. That's why I couldn't bear the thought of letting the farm he built go under. I see. I'm sorry for putting down your work. Emma gripped her coffee cup tightly, apologizing. Compared to your struggles, my own worries seem so trivial. I don't think they were trivial at all. No, they were small. And to think, your dad was the one who saved Harris Foods. I can't thank him enough. It was really just a misunderstanding, and I just wanted to clear that up. Even so, I still want to apologize and show my gratitude. Emma leaned forward, saying it so earnestly that I was momentarily taken aback. I managed to reply, carefully choosing my words. Oh, by the way, Dad seemed nostalgic when I mentioned Mr. Harris's name. Then let's do this. Why don't we have dinner at my place sometime soon? Wait, are you sure? Yes, actually, my dad's always been curious about yours. Right after middle school, you moved away so suddenly. At the time, I thought he had some negative reasons, but maybe he was just grateful for everything your family did. Yeah. Let's plan a day. I'll bring Dad along. Please do. Seeing her look so happy made me smile, too. We exchanged contact information right there. A few days later, my dad and I brought some of our finest farm-raised red sea bream and flounder to Harris Foods. When Mr. Harris and my dad met, they shared a firm, heartfelt handshake as they reunited after so long. The four of us ended up drinking and laughing together, forgetting the time. The sake Mr. Harris had prepared was delicious, and I found myself pleasantly buzzed. By the way, my daughter Emma here is already over 30 and still hasn't found herself a boyfriend, Mr. Harris said with a grin. No way. Such a beautiful woman, that's a shame. Though my son Rick here is pretty much in the same boat, my dad chimed in. Dad. Stop it. Seriously, Dad, cut it out. As the conversation unexpectedly turned to dating, Emma blushed and gave her dad a playful slap on the back. I, on the other hand, shot a glare at my own father. Rick, what do you think about my daughter? Mr. Harris asked suddenly. Huh? Oh, come on. Mr. Harris said, chuckling. Nicely said. What do you think, Rick? He added, nudging me. Well, I stammered, caught off guard, my cheeks growing warm. Mr. Harris and my dad exchanged a knowing look and chuckled. Emma gave my shoulder a playful tap and said, Come on, that's not an answer. I rubbed my shoulder, shooting her a look, but she just pretended not to notice. Watching her, I thought maybe, just maybe, we had a pretty good connection after all. It was a night filled with laughter and unexpected warmth.